Good morning, and welcome to really what is video number 2 in our emergency management series. So we're going to be chatting a little bit about emergency management, disaster management, the relief, some humanitarian aid work, that sort of stuff. But today we're going to spend just a few minutes talking about stakeholders within the emergency management field and how important they are. And really why, not why, but we overlook some of our stakeholders, and they really are probably the most valuable resource we have in an event. So we're very quick to call on our state and our government partners, but we overlook our private businesses, small local businesses, our neighbors, that sort of stuff, and those are all stakeholders. So basically, stakeholder. The concept of stakeholder, they own a share, or they're sort of responsible, or they're a piece of something much larger than themselves. So, think about it, owning stock, right? If I buy Apple stock, I don't own Apple. I own a small piece of Apple, so I am a stakeholder, right? If Apple does well, I do well. If Apple does poorly, I do poorly. So within the emergency management field, identifying those people who are in fact stakeholders and being able to tap into their skill set, whatever, that can be a real advantage for our work. So stakeholders, especially for our level, so for the emergency management, we're thinking about our community, the people that are sort of touching us, our organization, our business, whatever that looks like. There's really 3 levels, and I mentioned them, but it's so our social groups, economic groups, and then finally political groups. And we're going to spend just a couple minutes talking about them this morning. So much of your, and it is important just to stress this, much of the skill and the success you have dealing with these different stakeholders really has a lot to do with power, and where your level of power and the level of power of the people that you're trying to communicate with and trying to work with, that plays into it throughout this entire thing, and we'll continually keep hitting on that idea. So the first piece is the social groups. When we're talking about social groups, the basic sort of social group that we refer to within the emergency management program are households, right? Households are vital to the work that we try to do, right? They're the ones who are, they're trying to prevent hazards. They're preparing for natural disasters. They're the people that are evacuating, the people that are planning to evacuate. These are the people really at the lowest level who are suffering the impact of whatever the event was. This is where the majority of what I would call sort of an overlooked resource is, right? We like to think that in the case of an emergency, a crisis, or some sort of a disaster, that the state or FEMA, somebody comes riding in on a white horse and saves the day. But in reality, more likely than not, the first of first responders that you're going to encounter are going to be your neighbor, right? They're going to be the people across the street who recognize that you have a need, something like that. And because at this household level, a lot of the heavy lifting takes place, there are some untapped resources that are there, right? The first one that comes to mind is just numbers, right? In a city, 20,000 people, you may have let's say a county, so a county of 30,000 people, you may have an emergency management office of 1, maybe 2 people. Yet you have 20, 30,000 people who are looking out for themselves and their neighbors. So I think that really is something that we should look closer at within this field. The second group are economic groups. These are your small businesses, and they're the small businesses are the businesses that are at most risk if they encounter some sort of a disaster or emergency. The interesting piece of that, though, is that while they are they're the most at risk, these small businesses are some of the most they're most likely to respond, right, and offer aid and assistance and that sort of stuff, right? Several reasons for this. The first one, I think that probably the biggest reason is that they're part of the community already, right? If you if you have a local Kentucky Fried Chicken, there is a corporate office somewhere else that might be making some of the decisions and some of the rules and policies that are governing that KFC locally. If you own Thad's Pizza Parlor, I'm not looking for someone else to help me make decisions about what I can do and cannot do with my own money, my resources. And so what ends up happening is, we talked about the household level response that trickles up, if you will, into the small businesses. And so now the small businesses are acting almost as like sort of a household on steroids, and they're responding, and they are providing meals and that sort of stuff. A few years ago, we had a mass shooting in Pike County, Ohio, and we responded as the university in partnership with the Salvation Army. And the first night, I called up a local pizza place, and they donated 20 pizzas. The next night, when we needed some additional assistance, I contacted another local restaurant, but just one location. They weren't, these big conglomerates or anything. And he donated 25, I think, chicken dinners. It would have been a lot more, time consuming. I would not have been able to sort of move quickly if I was trying to call, some corporate offices in Washington, D.C. or New York or California or something like that. But when I was able to pick up the phone and call the owner of that small business, that small local business, it was really beneficial. The interesting part about that, though, is that the small businesses do tend to focus heavily on response and recovery, not only for themselves, but the work they do. And so very little is done in the way of preparation that really puts them to some degree behind the eight ball. And in that, they're sometimes affected by the storm as well, and so they're not able to do some of the response and recovery stuff. But had they done even a small degree of preparedness, that may have not been the case. What about disasters can cause, like I mentioned, they can cause business interruption. A large business, if you're a Domino's Pizza, for instance, and one of your stores closes, it's going to be a small hiccup, right? But if you own one, maybe two businesses, and you lose 50% or 100% of your income, it might be over for you. And so these storms do impact these small businesses fiercely. Third group is government stakeholders, right? This is our political piece. Government stakeholders include, right, your local villages, your towns, counties, cities, state, and even our federal partners. All of those people they're part of the political stakeholders. Most important stakeholders are the state emergency management offices. When we're talking about this government, they act as a hub, right? Our system of government really stops the federal government from dealing directly on the ground, and they use the state emergency management offices as sort of an intermediary between the local sort of what's going on the ground and the funds and the resources and that sort of stuff. It works out well, and then the state can divvy it out how it how it needs to be. All disasters are local, and so it just makes sense that a more localized response is making some of the decisions, right? So, if I'm dealing with something in Pike County, Ohio, for instance, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to call in people from Washington, D.C. to make decisions on the ground in Pike County, Ohio, because they're not going to understand the context of the county. They're not going to understand the sort of the political movements. They're not going to understand what has happened there previously. They're not going to get it, right? All disasters are local at their, and so funding them, resourcing them at the lowest possible level is the goal as well, right? And that's accomplished through our government stakeholders. So I hope that makes things a little clearer. There are, within each of those groups, right, there's different levels, but I just want to at least touch on them so you understood, what each group sort of brings to the table, and really the untapped potential that several of those stakeholder groups have that we're really not using effectively. I think in the future, as FEMA is beginning to sort of pull back some of what it is they say they can do, and they're relying more and more on sort of local emergency management, I think we're going to see an uptick in sort of that household level stakeholder, where they're going to get involved. They're going to want to come to the meetings. They're going to want to come and help design policy and the procedures for how we do this stuff, because they're going to be the sort of the driving force behind it. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, and we'll see what we can do. Thank you.